apparently when politics is involved, we all suck at math. Lovely. So it's a new study from Yale law professor Dan Cahan, and it was titled Motivated Numeracy in Enlightened Self-Government. And this whole study had actually asked a question of why does public conflict over societal risks persist in the face of compelling and widely accessible scientific evidence? Now remember, we're living in the age of where the vast majority of human knowledge is instantly accessible over the internet, and yet we use the internet for cats, mostly. Cats and porn. And so we have all of this knowledge, all of this data that we could use, but people's minds are not being changed, even though we have access to all of this data. But first I want to go into a little bit more of the study and say that numeracy, you may be wondering what that is. It's described as a measure of the ability and disposition to make use of quantitative information. There's something called the science comprehension thesis, which identifies defects in the public's knowledge and reasoning capabilities as the source of such controversies. So if you're not really into the news or anything like that, you don't follow news, politics, all that much, you're not going to be knowing very much about it. And that's the main argument that us liberals like to make. Well, you guys obviously don't know what you're talking about because you haven't looked at the facts. If only we give you enough facts, you're going to change your mind. And how often does that work? Like 0.00%.
Well, you can't give people facts and have them change their mind when they're ignoring facts. And there's not a lot of people. It's quite selective of people who are willing to take new knowledge and apply it and change their opinion. A lot of people have their opinion and they only accept knowledge which matches their opinion. Or information, not knowledge, information which matches their opinion. Whether or not the information is right or wrong has no bearing. They only accept it if it matches their pre-established position on something, and that's a huge problem with society in a general lack of critical thinking, not taught at a young age.
Yeah, and that's the whole crux of the study, the whole thing that this study has actually proven. And I'm going to go into also what they call the other piece of this is the identity protection cognition thesis. That's fascinating. Which it basically treats cultural conflict as disabling the faculties that members of the public use to make sense of decision-relevant science. So it's saying that it's basically saying that polarization and partisanship turn off that part of your brain that looks at facts, and so that you will match. Your brain will only agree with the facts that you already agreed with before.
That is really depressing.
It's a similar effect that happens to people that are very religious. They can't take in any other information other than what reinforces those beliefs, because they're actually rather insecure. They have to be in that mindset. They have to be rather insecure, secretly, innately. They have to be insecure about what they believe because they can't be objective and they can't look at information and objectively and decide whether or not it's true. They can't even process it, because if they process it and it turns out that it actually contradicts their beliefs, then their entire belief system and their world basically collapses from underneath them, and they feel destabilized.
But they will ignore it to avoid that.
Well, it has a big thing to do with people not being able to say I'm wrong. People have to believe they're right because somebody told them this, or something they read, or something that's in their head that's predetermined in their head to be right. And if suddenly you present them with evidence that shows they're wrong, there becomes this pride thing in people, and it's like, no, I'm not going to be wrong. And then to what Ree was saying also is that if you're talking about, say, the hardline Christians, the presuppositionalists or the Christian apologists, if they suddenly have to say, I'm wrong, well, now their whole world collapses. Now everything that they believe goes into question. So sometimes when you're talking about some of this information, the bias is not so much in the sense that they know that they are correct. It's more that they don't want to admit that they're wrong, whether it be to someone or to themselves.
Well, yeah, it'd have to be very difficult in that situation to admit that secular morality is superior to, to a religious morality, and by all accounts it actually is. But, to have to admit that after, growing up in years of indoctrinating, that would be very tough, and that's only one situation.
Right, it's not always religious. A lot of it,
there's political, religious, any type of group you could be a member of, feminism, anti-feminism, just all kinds of things that this could really be applied to.
Versus pi, 1,111 participants, which is very, very accurate. It's, a very accurate number, I guess, located in the study, and they were asked to solve a fairly difficult math problem, okay, that involved interpreting the results of a fake scientific study. While the fake study data that they were supposed to assess remained the same, sometimes the study was described as measuring the effectiveness of a new skin cream, for treating skin rashes. But in other cases, the study was described as involving the effectiveness of a law banning private citizens from carrying concealed handguns in public. And here's the fascinating part, is that survey respondents performed wildly different on what was in essence the same problem, simply depending on whether they had been told that it involved guns or or skin cream. What's more, it turned out that highly numerate liberals and conservatives were even more, not less, susceptible to letting politics skew their reasoning than were those with less mathematical ability. So it doesn't matter. If you're smart and really good at math, but it doesn't line up to your ideology, you're going to get it wrong. What I know is that 59% couldn't even get the math problem right.
Okay, well,
so that's depressing.
If you look at the graph, this is when they were given results that they didn't like. They still scored, so I'm assuming some of them got it right, but they didn't do as well as a group.
But again, this is the thing. It wasn't the math they got wrong. It was the way they interpreted the math.
Ah.
And that's one thing to remember too. That's a really important part.
I mean, it didn't say that if you think politically, or if you cloud your mind politically, or 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't meet your political ideals, that you're going to come up with the answer 5. It still is that these people came up with the answer 4. It's just the way they told you it was 4. That's the big difference. So it's not that they were getting things wrong because of their political views. It's that they answered things differently because of their political views. And to say which one, even in that study, to say which one is the right answer is kind of difficult. You have to look at the questions that were asked and the way it was posed. And even in that study, because I did read that article, it didn't go on to discuss any of the other questions that were being asked. They just focused on the one that they picked out for the political test.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it a little different. So, and that's why I say it comes down to a matter of interpretation. It doesn't mean you're going to get stupider. It just means that depending on your political ideas can, and it proved something that we all know, that your political ideas can skew your judgment regardless of how smart you are.
Correct.
Well, it goes more into depths. His study found that the more numerate you are, the more likely you are to get the answer to the skin cream problem right. Okay? Moreover, it found no substantial difference between highly numerate Democrats and highly numerate Republicans in this regard. They both did really well in the skim cream problem, right? But the better members of both political groups were at math, the better they were at solving the skin cream problem. However, I should say highly numerate liberal Democrats did almost perfectly when the right answer was that the concealed weapons ban does indeed work to decrease crime. And so this is going to the other question, whereas because it favors their pro-gun control predilections, right? But then, they did worse when the correct answer in the study was that crime increases in cities that enact the ban. And the opposite was true for highly numerate conservative Republicans. They did great when the right answer was the ban didn't work, but really badly when the right answer was that it did. So once again, they did really bad.
Here's the thing that I find, again, having gone through that article and read what they were doing, here's where I have a bit of a problem, because that's how the article reads and that's how they talk about it. But look at those questions, look at the questionnaire that they have presented there. And what are they asking the people to do? They didn't ask them to solve the equations of how has crime increased and decreased, or how much has crime increased and decreased. They gave them set numbers and said, here's your static. Now, and then they gave them multiple choice questions, and they said, how do you read this? What does this say to you? I don't have the questions in front of me. But it basically said, looking at the skin cream one, did more people have a better
get rashes
or a worse reaction? And that was the question. It wasn't how many people were better off because of the skin cream. The question was, were people better off because of the skin cream based on these numbers that we're giving you?
Was that cream the kind that lightens vaginas? No?
Could be.
Sal for anal tattoos.
Oh.
Sorry.
Go there.
Sorry.
In many cases, I find a lot of studies just to be bogus garbage because of the way that they were done. And I'll give you an example. The old adage of marijuana destroying brain cells, believed it for years. All these people thought about it. Oh yeah, all the stoners and stuff, and everybody thought that. But the problem is that came from one study done, and that study that was done on monkeys, and they literally put gas masks on the monkeys and clouded them so much with fumes that they couldn't get any oxygen in. And when you can't get oxygen, brain cells start to die. So they blamed it on the marijuana, not the fact that they were choking them and suffocating them without oxygen. So I always like to go into studies and say, how was the study performed, and look at it under those conditions. And I don't have a link to it, so I don't know I'm not familiar with the study that you're talking about. So that's why I would really like to look into it more.
Even without having to look at the study, it's one of those, I think, it's one of those no-brainer type of studies because it makes a lot of sense. Because it's a confirmation story. Because we already have all experienced this. Nobody's changed each other's minds. Like, I could talk to somebody who denies climate science all day, present all the data to them that they could possibly need to make an informed decision. And they'll still go, nope, junk, pseudoscience, I believe it. I don't trust it. I trust my gut. I trust what I've seen.
Yeah, it's
and
kind
they could do
like
the same thing. They could say, well, it's snowing outside. What climate? What global warming? What climate change? And they can present all their so-called proof, and we'd never believe it as well.